Hi, everyone. My name is Stefaan Verhulst. I'm delighted to give a presentation today to the Artificial Intelligence for Information Accessibility Conference. And I will focus on the question whether or not we are entering a fourth wave of open data and how that will impact information accessibility. And more importantly, what is the role of artificial intelligence towards that end? Just a brief background. I'm Stefaan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of two centers. On the one hand, the GovLab, which is based in New York, and on the other hand, the Data Tank, which is based in Brussels. And I'm also a research professor at the Tandon School of Engineering, which is based in New York, of course, and specifically, I'm also at the Center for Urban Science and Progress. And throughout all the work that I've been doing at the GovLab, but also at the Data Tank and also at the Center for Urban Science and Progress, I've been mainly focused on how do we unlock data for reuse in the public interest, which automatically, of course, has led me to really study the past, present, and future of open data. And as it relates to open data, we can say that we've been through a variety of waves. A few years ago, we were alerting the world that we were entering the third wave of open data, by which we meant that in addition to freedom of information and in addition to open government data platforms, we were also seeing that the world was moving towards data collaboratives. Data collaboratives where not only open government data was shared, but also data from the private sector was made available. And so what we can see as it relates to open data is that till now, we've at least had those three waves that are distinctive in nature, but to a large extent build upon each other. As I mentioned, the first wave really focuses on freedom of information, is really about data on request, so that you have a right to know, but you actually do have to request it. It's more kind of pull focused and quite often nationally based. The second wave, which was about 15 years ago, where more and more governments were also opening up administrative data or data that they were collecting for other purposes than initially intended. And so that's the open government data wave, which was based upon this notion of open by default, so that you didn't have to request it. It was basically available at a website. And then the third wave, which happened a few years ago, which was really where public and private sector data was made available. And that was really about creating new kinds of public-private partnerships where we have published with purpose and really about aligning subnational and the national as well. Now, what we have seen more recently is actually that despite the fact that we've made a big advance in terms of open data, in terms of freedom of information, but also big advances as it relates to accessing private sector data, such as, for instance, social media data, we are actually at a real important crossing point. A crossing point where, on the one hand, we see what I call a backwash, kind of moving backwards in how we were approaching open data. But on the other hand, and that hopefully will give kind of the optimistic point of view in today's presentation, we're also entering a new wave that complements and actually can strengthen the three waves that we've had so far as it relates to open data. And that new wave specifically is fueled as a result of and thanks to artificial intelligence. But before I go into the more optimistic scenario, which still has a question mark, let me also take a few moments to reflect on what I call the approaching data winter. And by data winter, I mean similar to in the past where we had AI winters, where access to AI and especially investment and interest in AI were declining. We see that we are entering a AI summer, but at the same time, we have a data winter where we are actually seeing a decrease in availability of data. And we see this in a variety of contexts. First one, and I'm just going to give you a few examples on how the data winter is currently manifesting. First of all, we see that access to private sector data, such as, for instance, platform data, is declining. In the past, access to Twitter data was available through an API. You could also access data of Meta, for instance. Now, all of this is declining, and the API to Twitter data, which is now X, of course, has also been closed and is only available to high-paying customers as well. Second exhibit is as it relates to open science data, where we see open science data, such as, for instance, climate data, that typically was freely and accessibly available, has now also been closed and is quite often now considered proprietary data. And as a result, we see this decline in access to data that matters to society, especially as society is trying to accommodate climate change as well. A third exhibit is what I call generative AI anxiety, which is where we see that data is becoming closed as a result of an anxiety about extractive behavior for generative AI training. And we see this in a variety of contexts. Wikipedia, for instance, is of course also suffering from AI, where we have seen a decline in actually people contributing to Wikipedia. But we also have seen other so-called knowledge commons declining or selling their data in ways that was previously unimaginative, but also is actually against the whole spirit of the knowledge commons as well. And then more recently, we also have seen that training data is running out, and that a lot of corporations that are working on AI development are calling for an investment in AI data because they feel that the data that powers AI is also disappearing fast. And that is also quite often a result of actually data being closed so that it cannot be scraped as well. And as it relates to scraping, what we also have seen is a massive closure of what typically was called the public web, meaning the web that was available publicly, content that was available publicly on the web that you could scrape. But what we see is actually a massive decline in the public web, quite often as a result of interventions such as robotext or CAPTCHA kind of provisions, so that data is not accessible anymore, especially for massive scraping purposes as well. And then the last exhibit that I will use is also an exhibit that indicates that even open government data that had made so much progress is now also slowing in progress, and even commitments that were made to open data are now also being revisited, quite often as a result of budget crunch, but we also see less open government data available. And so we are in an environment, and of course, what I forgot here also is that clearly as a result of geopolitical tensions and also changes in the political landscape, we also have seen that, of course, certain governments, such as the US government, is also data that was available, government data is also now making it less accessible and even delete some of that data as well. And so we see a data winter, which obviously goes against the previous waves that we've had with regard to open data. And as I predicted in other writing, this data winter might actually also lead to an undermining of the AI summer that we currently have. Now, that's the pessimistic point of view of the current situation of open data. There is actually also a more optimistic view that we can enter here. And so this is where I have called the emergence of a fourth wave of open data, where we see open data being used to improve AI, but where we also see AI being used for democratizing data. And so let me quickly unpack that a little bit and explain what we mean by the fourth wave of open data. Well, the first, as I mentioned, it's really about data for AI, meaning data that can be used to actually improve AI. And here we've done quite a lot of analysis of how open data can be used for a variety of scenarios. And of course, the usual scenarios are about pre-training, are about fine-tuning, but also about augmenting data, because I think the biggest public interest use case for AI is, of course, the so-called RAG use cases, where you have designated data being used for context-specific applications, and that requires high-quality data such as open data, but it also, of course, requires unique data in ways that is not available online, for instance. And so here I give you the link to our repository of how open data is being used for a variety of AI use cases. And I think it suffices to say is that open data can actually be used for a variety of use cases, such as, for instance, RAG use cases, which I already mentioned, but also open data enables actually open source AI, which is, of course, a big topic in the current AI development environment as well. Now, the second aspect of the fourth wave, in addition to data for AI, we can actually start using AI for data as well. And the first use case is, of course, where AI can be used for making open data conversational or data conversational through a chatbot so that you actually don't have to have a data science background in order to ask questions to data, but that you, in plain English or plain language, you can formulate a question and hopefully get an answer back from the open data set through a conversational interface. And these are some examples like the Bion platform in Abu Dhabi, but others where we've seen advances with regard to open data conversation. The other aspect where AI can be used for improving open data is, for instance, through synthetic data, where synthetic data can be used in order to complement open data, in order to especially fill in gaps that open data might have. Other areas where AI can be used to democratize data is to actually develop code books so that it's easier to start manipulating the open data. You don't need to have and start from scratch. You can actually use AI to develop code books to analyze open data. You can also start using AI to actually improve the data quality. This is an example where, for instance, a data contract is embedded in a technological architecture and where AI assesses to what extent the data aligns with the data contract, which has specified particular kind of quality requirements as well. And the last use case I will mention here, because this is supposed to be a short presentation, is where AI can also be used for data discovery. And we've seen in multiple use cases where AI can actually be used for discovering open data and then making it subsequently available and accessible as well. So on the one hand, we have the emergence data winter. On the other hand, we actually see the emergence of a fourth wave of open data where data can be used, and especially open data can be used to improve AI so that it doesn't hallucinate, so that actually we have new, more diverse public interest use cases. But on the other hand, we also have, of course, AI that can be used to improve data and improve democratization of the data. And the question is, of course, how do we actually ride the wave? Well, there are a few, in order to make sure that the fourth wave becomes a reality, there are a few steps that need to be taken into account. And I just going to reflect on 8 key elements that need to be in place in order to really be able to accelerate the fourth wave and even to enable the fourth wave where we actually have open data become more accessible and available again. The first one is that most of the open data today is still not AI ready. And so we need to really invest in making open data AI ready. And what do we mean by AI readiness? Well, it means that we need to extend the FAIR framework where we still have findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, but we also now need to have a fifth category, which is really about readiness for AI. And that means that we need to improve data provenance. We need to improve an understanding of the context and the lineage where data was created or generated. And so that's a second element in order to really make sure that we can ride the fourth wave. And here are just a few examples where provenance standards are being developed and also where efforts are being made in order to have better access to data. We also need to prioritize public interest use cases because not all data needs to be made AI ready. We need to really try to become more strategic and understanding what use cases do we need AI-ready data for? And so this is, of course, the work that we've been doing within the context of the 100 questions, which really tries to prioritize use cases. What are the 100 questions that matter the most for which we need data? The same thing we need to do with regard to AI-ready data. What are the 100 questions, the 100 use cases for which we need AI-ready data, such as, for instance, climate, health, or other applications? Now, the other element that we need to do is that we also need to start innovating in new kind of institutional forms to provide access to data for AI. And this is where, of course, we need to, and here at GovLab, we've done a lot of work on establishing data commons, which are a particular kind of pools of data that are governed in ways that are aligned with the expectations and preferences of the data holders or the people whose data is included in the data set to a large extent. And so we need to really not just make data open, we actually need to provide access to data via data commons so that it's more trustworthy and so that we also have less of that kind of extractive behavior. The fifth element is that we really, and this is quite important for talking about open data or information accessibility, is that we really need to broaden our concept of data. I mean, there's one thing that AI has done is that it really has pushed us towards accessing unstructured data in ways that we didn't anticipate in the past. And so we really need to start broaden our concept of data, which also means that we need to broaden our concept of open data, which in the current environment still is very much structured data. And here is kind of an example of a mapping that we've done in order to really provide an insight about the data types that are useful for generative AI, and that ranges from text to audio to images to video, but also, of course, statistics as well. But typically, open data is only in the current environment quite often focused on the statistical or structured data kind of concepts. The sixth element that we need to do is to really start rethinking data licensing. And that's both for purposes of copyright, but it's also of purposes of privacy. And because quite often we don't really have the agency that is needed to determine how data is made accessible and available. And so we need to innovate kind of the conditions under which data is made accessible. And here are just a few examples, like the responsible AI license, but also we have the Ubuntu Open Data License for licensing African languages. And we at GovLab have done a lot of work in the data tank, a lot of work in order to advance a social license for data reuse, which basically seeks to embed the preferences and expectations of people. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but seventh aspect is that we also need to upgrade data governance because data governance is to a large extent the bedrock for AI governance. And so far, we have a lot of data governance that is ripe for the previous waves. But for the fourth wave of open data, we will also have to really establish new ways of data governance, including AI readiness assessments, but also better legal frameworks for balancing privacy, competition, and AI and openness, as I mentioned. And we also need new funding mechanisms for actually advancing AI-powered initiatives. And then lastly, we also need new professions. And this is where data stewardship comes in, because data stewards are those roles that really seeks to enable access to data for reuse in a more systematic, sustainable, and responsible way. And that also means that in order to make data AI ready and in order to ride the fourth wave, we really need to invest in those functions, in those roles, because without the human infrastructure, it's not going to be able to really accelerate the fourth wave of open data. And so what I've hoped to do in this conversation is to really provide an overview of today's situation as it relates to open data, as it relates to the access to data. And as I said, we are actually in the worst of times and the best of times. Worst of times is that we see a backlash of data accessibility as a result of the data winter, which has many manifestations, including closing private sector data access to ultimately also clearly a decline in access to open data or knowledge commons data as well. But on the other hand, we also might be seeing the best of times where AI enables us to actually go a step further, really accelerate access to data, enables us to analyze and make data more available in conversational manners. And so the real question and opportunity and challenge for today is, where will we go? Will we go in a positive direction, or will we see the negative direction of a data winter emerge? And I think this is where hopefully this conference can also reflect on what do we need to do to prevent the worst of times, and what do we need to do in order to really enable the best of times so that we have a fourth wave of open data as and as I have tried to explain in this small conversation, small talk as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this provided meaningful input in the conference as such. Thank you very much.